Okay, so we're good to go. Okay, so let's start the Gemara. We're all the way at the bottom of Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis. And the Gemara is talking about the Mishnah. So let's go back to the Mishnah, which I believe is on Yud Aleph Amud Beis, I think. Yes, indeed it is. And let's see what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says, Hechsher Mavi, Beishamay Oimim Lechi V'Kayer, U'Besil Oimim Oy Lechi Oy Kayer. And Rabbi Lezer said Lechian. Now, Mishum Rabbi Shmuel, Omer Talmud Echad, there was a Talmud who said over something in the name of Rabbi Shmuel. And who did he say it to? Rabbi Kiva. So there's this Talmud saying, Rabbi Kiva, I heard the following from Rabbi Shmuel. And you know what Rabbi Shmuel said? Lo nechleku beishamai u'esil al mavui shehu pachas me'arba amois shehu niter oy belechi oy bekoire al manechleku al rochav me'arba amois biad eser amois shebeishami oymim lechi bekoire u'vesil oymim oy lechi oy koire. So if we stop right here, before Rabbi Kiva responded, we have a machlokes. The first Tana seems to indicate that Beishamai and Beis Hillel have their machlokes everywhere, and this Talmud was suggesting that the machlokes is only if it's greater than four amos. So now Rabbi Kiva responded, Amar Rabbi Kiva al zev al zanechlechu. So the problem the Gemara is going to ask is that's exactly what the Tanakama said. What is Rabbi Kiva changing from the Tanakama? So let's see the Gemara. Zok the Heilige Gemara on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. Rabbi Kiva Omer al zev al zanechlechu. Correct the Gemara. Rabbi Kiva Hainu Tanakama. Rabbi Kiva seems to be saying the exact same thing that the Tanakama said. So what is he adding? What is he adding that's of value to us? So the more Rav Achli, the Tem Rabbi Yechiel, we had on Yud Beis that Rav Achli, or it was a question if Rav Achli said it, if Rabbi Yechiel said it, but they said once a movoi is less than 4 tvachim open, it needs no remedy at all. So the difference between the Tanakama and Rabbi Kiva is whether or not a movoi that's less than 4 tvachim requires a remedy. Now they're not talking about that at all. The Tanakama doesn't mention a word about that. Rabbi Kiva doesn't mention a word about it. So who holds what? We don't know who holds what. We do not know who holds what. All we know is that this is probably the Nakuda that they're arguing as to whether or not a movoi that's less than 4 tvachim, if it requires a remedy.
How can that movie be 4 tvachim? Nobody can walk through it. 4 tvachim
is typically the minimum size door. So if it's a drop less than 4 tvachim, it probably would be a tight squeeze. But even if nobody can get in, our question is, people who are in, maybe they came in through a back entrance, would they be able to carry there? And the answer is that they're machlokes if they're able to carry there, and probably exactly because of your suggestion, it's not an entrance anymore. It's considered completely closed in, and I guess you'd have to get there through some other method. Zok the Gemara weiter. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva said, the Talmud told Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Shmuel said that they're not arguing if it's less than 4 amos. So Rabbi Kiva responded to the Talmud, no, lo Amar Rabbi Shmuel davar zeh. There's no way that Rabbi Shmuel could have said something like that. And Rashi tells us, because I know Rabbi Shmuel, the Talmud Chacham, he wouldn't say anything as wrong as what you're suggesting. And then, after Rabbi Kiva shot this guy down and said there's no way Rabbi Shmuel said it, then he said, oh, by the way, the halacha is a Talmud, but he's right. So, in fact, Hagufa Kasha. First, Amrit Loy Amr Rabbi Shmuel over there. First, Rabbi Kiva said it's impossible. That's not true. Amal Lesach, meaning he's not going to paskin like that Chita. He's going to hold it a machlokes between Rabbi Shammai and Beis Hillel across the board. Amar Halacha is a Talmud, and then Rabbi Kiva turns around the second later and says, "You're right." How could that be? Zok Gemara Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel Loy Amar Rabbi Kiva Ela Lachadid Ba Talmidim. Rabbi Kiva was just trying to encourage the Talmidim. After he shot him down, he wanted to say, oh, but you're a smart guy. because he wanted to encourage them to continue working and harving and being mefalpel on the sukkah. Rav Nachman Yitzchak Amar near an itmar. He didn't say halacha. He said, I hear the svara. It's a good svara. But Avada, he didn't mean that halacha is like that. So the first thing that we need to deal with is this whole sugya is tumbling about is the machlokes between Bisham and Basil less than 4 amis or only more than 4 amis. If you think about it, we paskin anyways like Basil. According to Basil, it's oilachi, oikaira, whether it's less than 4 amis, whether it's more than 4 amis. Across the board, you always need either a lachi or a kaira. Beis Shammai, who anyway we don't paskin like, it's a shiloh where he argues. Why is the Gemara so focused on what Beis Shammai holds when we all know that we don't paskin like Beis Shammai anyway? So why is the Gemara so concerned about Beis Shammai? So there are certain Mefarshim who want to say that the discussion that Beis Shammai and Basil had in our Mishnah was referring to Amavi. And in fact, in Amavi, we pass on like Basil, that you either need a lechi or a kaira. But the Gemara wanted us to argue that we learned on yesterday's daf, we learned on Erev Shabbos, that a chotzer is more chomer than a mavi, and the chotzer needs either 2 passen, and there are some shittas of Rebbe and Rebbe hold, if you have one wall that's 4 tvachim, that would be good enough, but you do need 2 passen. So the Gemara was saying, Beis Shammai who holds by mavi, that you need a lechi and a kaira, holds that if it's less than 4 amis, you don't need it. So maybe by a chotzer, if it was less than 4 amis, maybe you don't need shnei passen. Maybe 1 pass would be enough, and that's why the Gemara.
If it's less than 4 amis, it's not a chotzer.
Why not? Why can't there be a chotzer less than 4 amis? I think it could be a chotzer less than 4 amis. 4 amis is pretty big. 4 amis is 8 feet. It could be 6 feet. Okay, Zok the Gemara weiter. Amar Rabbi Shubban Levi. Kol Mokai Shata Moitzei Mishum Rabbi Shmuel Amar Talmud Echad Lefnei Rabbi Kiva. Anytime you find in Shas where an anonymous Talmud said something over that he heard from Rabbi Shmuel to Rabbi Kiva, that means this is a Talmud who learned once by Rabbi Shmuel, and then he went to Rabbi Kiva. It means he must have changed yeshivas. If he changed yeshivas, I want to know why he changed yeshivas. Maybe he wasn't a tzliach. I don't know. If a boy changed yeshivas too many times, I'm going to nix his shidduch resume. He changed yeshivas too many times. So this fellow was a guy who changed yeshivas too many times. I once heard over from Rav Marvin Sigler that when he looked for Edemis, he was very makbid to find Edemis that didn't go to too many yeshivas, because then there's too many Rosh yeshivas that are going to be coming knocking on his door. So he wanted to make sure that his Edemis wouldn't have too many yeshivas. I don't know where I heard this, but I like the ha'ara. If your Edom went by 20 yeshivas, then you're going to have 20 Rosh yeshivas knocking on your door. Zok tehele Gemara weiter. So anyway, anytime you have someone who says, every time the Gemara says there's a Talmud who said something over to Rabbi Akiva, who he heard from Rabbi Shmuel, do you know who this Talmud was? Einu el Reb Meir. Reb Meir was that Talmud. Why is that? Because Shashima says Rabbi Shmuel versus Rabbi Akiva. Reb Meir was, I guess, one of the only Talmidim that both learned in Rabbi Shmuel's yeshiva and in Rabbi Akiva's yeshiva. So therefore, he was able to repeat to Rabbi Akiva what the other Rosh Yeshiva said, which you think is a little strange. That other Yeshiva said not like you. So we're talking about Rav Shraga Feivel Mendelovich. Rav Shraga Feivel, when Rav Hutter opened up the Chaim Berlin Yeshiva, Rav Shraga Feivel wanted to help him. So Rav Shraga Feivel said, whoever lives closer to my yeshiva can come to my yeshiva, but all the bachim in my yeshiva that live closer to Brownsville, which is where Chaim Berlin originally opened up, has to leave my yeshiva and has to go to Chaim Berlin. So it was never about him. It was always about what's best for Torah. So therefore, it's not a steer. If Reb Meir told Rabbi Akiva what Rabbi Shmuel said, everybody was mechaber each other. The Tanya, Amar Meir, Kishayisi Eitzel Rabbi Shmuel, when I was still learning in Rabbi Shmuel's yeshiva, Hayisi Matil Kankantoim l'toich hadiyoi. I would put this chemical called kankantoim into the ink of the ink that I was writing a Sefer Torah with. Now, what's unique about kankantoim is it's permanent ink. If kankantoim gets on something, it does not come back. It doesn't come off. I just want to make sure that I'm pronouncing kankantoim right. Kankantoim, yeah. So I used to put that ingredient into the ink, and that made it that it could never get erased. For the Amrli Dover, Rabbi Shmuel had no problem with it. But Kishabasi told Rabbi Kiva, when I came to learn by Rabbi Kiva, Osrala, he said, I may no longer put this chemical into the ink that's going to make it that it can never be erased. So at first glance, you're going to think, what's wrong? It's excellent if it's permanent ink. This way it'll last longer. So the Gemara is going to explain what the potential problem is soon. In fact, are you telling me that Rabbi Shmuel allowed the ink and it was Rabbi Kiva who disallowed it? We have a different accounting. For Omer Rabbi Yehuda, Omer Shmuel, Mishum Rabbi Meir, Kishayis, he learned it Rabbi Kiva. When I used to learn in Rabbi Kiva's yeshiva, Hayisimatel kan kantem lotechadoi v'leyamli davar. U'chushavos Rabbi Shmuel, Omer li, he told me, B'ni, my dear son, Mama lachtacha, what do you do for a living? What do you want to do for a living? I'm a yeshiva bacher. But I guess in those days, you could have a yeshiva bacher who also earned a parnosa. Amarti, I told him, Lavler, I'm a sofer. Amr li, B'ni, if you're a sofer, let me warn you. Have a zoyer b'malachtecha. You need to be very careful in your work as a sofer, and you do critical work. Shemalachtecha malecha shemayim. Your work is the work of heaven. Shema ato mechaser ois achas, or miyaser ois achas. If you leave out one letter, or you put in an extra letter, nimtzos machriv es kol ha'olam kuloi. You might destroy the whole world. How is that? So Rashi and Tosfos offer different suggestions as to what letters can be catastrophic. So Rashi says, Hashem Elakechem emes. If you leave out the aleph and emes, read Hashem Elakechem is not here any longer. That's catastrophic. So Dechser aleph harayat machrit, or every time it says Vayidaber Hashem im hoisev oisachas, if you add a vav and you say Vayidabru nimtas machriv, because you're saying that there's many cooks in the kitchen, and that's mamish kvira. So because of that, you have to be very careful what you write. Now, Tosfos has a little bit of a difference of opinion. Tosfos says, if you put a vav, it's boroi, which is indicating that there were two entities involved in creating the world. For Rabbi Meir, Kibel Meir Boisov, Kamoi, Hoiva al Hoiva, Shehitel Yud al Achrein. If you, I'm not sure what this means. Can anyone help me with Pshat and Tosfos? Rabbi Meir, Kibel Meir Boisov, Kamoi, Hoiva al Hoiva, in Yecheskel, Shehitel Yud al Achrein, he put a Yud on the last one. Avaya, I'm not sure what it means, but whatever's messed up the word. So there's I think the Maral has a problem with this. The Maral has a kasha that he didn't like, that it's not. What's up is he's warning him about this idea of adding letters or missing letters. It's not a common thing to occur. So there are other pshatim offered. The Ramban said the main thing is that someone shouldn't mess up when he's writing the Shem Hashem. But the interesting thing is that there's a machlokes in a machlokes for Shonim in Maseches Megillah. If a Sefer Torah is missing a letter, it's a shaila if it's mutter or usher b'di'evid. So Tosfos holds b'di'evid, if you read from a Sefer Torah that was missing one letter, you're yotze. You don't have to read again. But the other Rishonim learn that if you read from a Sefer Torah that's missing a letter, it's possible. So the question is, Freik the Maral, why did Rabbi Shmuel warn Rabbi Meir that if you mess up a letter at the machriv as kol ha'olam kuloi, why didn't you say you're not yotze? You're not yotze. You're not yotze the mitzvah. Isn't that pretty critical? So the Maral answered very beautifully, and the Maral said that if you lengthened it, you might not be yotze. Rabbi Shmuel was trying to impress Rabbi Meir, even if you don't learn the Sefer Torah, merely having a Sefer Torah in existence that has such a critical mistake, like Boroi with a Vav, or Hashem Elakechem without the Emes, without the Aleph and Emes, that will be machriv the world, even if no one reads it. So even if there's not a problem of being Yotze the Mitzvah, merely that Sefer Torah in existence is a serious problem. So let's see the Gemara weiter. Amarti loy, I told him, Dover echad yeshli. Rabbi Meir told me, Rabbi Shmuel told me to be very careful how I write the Sefer Torah. So I responded to him, Dover echad yoshli, I have this thing, the kankantum shemoy, and it's called kankantum. It's an ingredient. Shani matla seichadiyoi. I put it into the ink. Now, how in the world does this address the concern that Reb Shmuel had? I don't know. The Gemara is going to deal with that later. But Amar Li, he responded to me, V'chimatilin kankantoim l'soichadiyoi. Are you allowed to put kankantoim into the ink? So now we're finally going to get the answer why there's a problem with using permanent ink when you write a Sefer Torah. About a parsha of Soita, it says that they write the parsha of Soita, and then they pour water over it and they wipe it out, and that becomes the water that the Soita will drink, meaning ksav shiyochal imchos. You see from here that the ksav of the, at least the parsha of Soita, has to be ksav that could be erased, that could be washed out. So clearly, kankantim would not be allowed. So the Gemara asks, first of all, before we get down into that part, let's move back a couple of steps. What was the concern that Rabbi Shmuel was saying about missing a noise that Rab Meir thought he could mitigate with the kankantim? So he told Rabbi Shmuel, you're worried about me missing things? Let me tell you how careful I am. Forget about missing letters. That I'm a boki, there's no way I would make such a mistake. But I'm even more careful. And what I do, imagine I write a dalet, and the ink is wet, and a fly lands on it and rubs out that little piece that's sticking out from the back of the dalet, which makes it into a dalet rather than a reish. And if a fly is able to erase that little piece, and it'll make it into a reish. So how do I prevent that from happening? Now how does that do the trick? So the Pashup shot is since it can't be erased, since it's permanent ink, even if a fly lands on it, it will not take that away. But there are some Mepharshim who say that kankantim is actually an insect repellent. So really, when Trudeau looked like he had a black face, it wasn't blackface. He sprayed off. It was off that was called kankantim. See, if I would be his publicist, I would have been able to explain what it was that he did. It wasn't blackface. He was just using insect repellent that was called kankantim. I'll call upon him. We have here some steers. A is who did the mayor learn by first? Who did he learn by second? We have two different stories. So one story says he learned by Rabbi Shmuel first, and the other story says he learned by Rabbi Akiva first. That's problem one. Problem number two is who says that it's mutter, who says that it's osir? In the first accounting, it's Rabbi Shmuel that's saying it's mutter, and Rabbi Akiva said that it's osir. In the second accounting, it was Rabbi Akiva who said it was mutter, and Rabbi Shmuel said it's mutter. So what's going on? Kasha shimus hashimus. Yes.
Does it have to be that it's dissolvable in water? Or because you could scratch it off regardless how permanent it is, unless it seeps through the actual cloth. Why can't you scratch it off?
Supposedly it's permanent. You can't even scrape it off. You can't even scrape it off. That's how I understood it. It says the kankantim rishumei nikr ma'od. So it's gonna absorb it, and no matter what you do, it'll still be noticeable that it's there, that it was written there. So the Gemara wants to kasha shimus hashimush. First of all, which yeshiva? I'm trying to go through this boy's resume. I'm trying to figure out which yeshiva he learned in, and something doesn't add up over here. When did he learn in this yeshiva, and when did he learn in that yeshiva? And kasha asra, it's also sure who holds what. So if you want to work out the details of a mayor's resume for a shidduch, not a problem. This is what happened. First, he went to Rabbi Akiva's yeshiva, but Rabbi Akiva was such a tifa guy. He couldn't chap the svaris. It didn't make sense what he was saying. And Rashi tells us why. Not because Reb Meir was learning disabled, but rather Rashi tells us Rabbi Akiva hayacharav tuva. He was a very sharp guy. Since Rabbi Akiva was so unbelievably tif, somehow Reb Meir could not chap the details of the svaris that Rabbi Akiva was saying. So he decided to change yeshivas. He left Brisk and he went to the Mir. Also, the Kamed Rabbi Shmuel, he went to the Mir. The Gemara, he learned Rashi's Mishnah Shakibel Miraboisov. So Gemara doesn't mean our Gemara. This was before the days of the Gemara. He went and learned the Mishnah, so he learned all the halachas. And once he had all the halachas down pat, then he went back to brisk. Then and then he got to Svara. So Rashi says, so first he needed to get the information clear. He went to the mirror and he got all the information clear and all the halachas clear. Then he went to Rabbi Kiva to get alumnus. To get the lumdus behind the halachas. Rabbi Kiva was the Sinai, so it was the Iker Harim, who was asking kashas and steers from one Mishnah to another Mishnah. Once Reb Meir had clarity in what all the Mishnah said, then he was able to appreciate Rabbi Kiva's pilpulu. So that went back and forth.
Kal Bishvar didn't want to do a shidduch with Rabbi Kiva because it got a gestopten cup. And it came to a point where he became so big that he was verstanden.
He became the yeshiva brisk. You know how much money it took to get into his yeshiva? You know how much money Reb Meir's father had to pay to get him into brisk?
Reb Meir's father gut nicht gehabt.
Reb Meir's father?
Hachen schwer. Das hat nicht gewollt zu. Das Schwert nicht gewollt zu.
You're saying good. So what happened was, but the problem is, on the Osra Kasha, we still have a problem. Who says what? So tomorrow Kasha will bleib shver. Now, Kasha doesn't mean it's a tiyovta. Kasha means it's bleib shver. So there are some terutzim that people suggest that maybe when we have a stira, was Rabbi Kiva answering or not, maybe Rabbi Kiva only answered to use kankantoim for the parsha of Soita, but not for the rest of the Torah. Because the whole reason why at this point there's a suggestion as to why you should not be able to write the Torah with kankantim is only because of the problem that you're going to have, like Rabbi Shmuel said, the problem you're going to have by Parsha Soita. So maybe, so I actually mixed it up. So maybe when Rabbi Shmuel answered, maybe Rabbi Shmuel is only answering Parsha Soita, not the rest of the Torah, and maybe Rabbi Kiva is answering all of the Torah. So that's what some people try to suggest, but it doesn't really answer it fully because Rabbi Kiva said Rabbi Kiva didn't bother him at all over here. Zok the Gemara weiter. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Eimer. Rabbi Yehuda said, Rabbi Meir Haya Eimer. So Rabbi Yehuda is quoting from Meir. Lekoil matilin kankantoim l'soichatiyoi. For all of the Torah, when you're writing the Torah, you're allowed to put kankantoim chutz mi parsha Soita, except for the parsha of Soita. Rabbi Elvin spoke out something very interesting, that if you hold that let's say you hold kankantoim is not allowed. Let's say you have a puzzle. So what would happen, and this is a story that actually happened, is there was a Sefer Torah that was kidnapped, stolen, and it was taken to Jordan, and somehow they got it out, and in Jordan it got damaged, and the person who got it out saw that there was damage, so he gave it to a Sefer to fix, and the Sefer used ink that was puzzle. So the Sefer Torah is puzzle. The question is, can the owner of the Sefer Torah sue the Sefer for using the wrong ink? So they ended up asking that the Sefer is potter because it's called a Hezek Sheni Nicker. Because even though it's puzzle ink, but you can't tell by looking at it that it's puzzle. So let's see what the Gemara says over here. Let's see what the Gemara says. And the reason is simple, like we said, because that parsha has to be able to be erased. If Yaakov said in his name, I assume in her mayor's name, chutz mi parshas soita shebemikdash. A Sefer Torah, you can write it with kankantoim, because you're not going to actually take a Sefer Torah and wipe out the parsha of soita in the Sefer Torah. They wrote, the Kohen actually had to write the parsha of soita special if there was a soita. So that separate parsha that a Kohen would have written, that cannot be written with ink that won't be rubbed out. That has to be written with ink that could be rubbed out. My benayu, what's the machlokes between these two shitas? The nafkamina is if you have to service a soita, are you allowed to just take a regular Sefer Torah and wipe out with water the parsha of Soita in the Torah, or do you need to make an exclusive parsha Soita just for this occasion? And the machlokes that we just discussed over here between Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Yehuda, whether or not you're allowed to use the pre-written parsha of Soita in the Sefer Torah for the Soita process, there's another set of Tanoim that argue about this same machlokes. The Tanya, Ein Megillas Kshera Lahashkus Ba Soita Acheres. What happens if they wrote a special parsha of Soita to service a Soita, and she panicked and she said, "I did it." So now you have a parsha of Soita written that you have no use for, and then you had another Soita. Are you allowed to use this parsha of Soita to service another Soita? So Rabbi Achi Yosy Amar Megillas Kshera Lahashkus Ba Soita Acheres. Yeah, you could use it, no problem. Omar Pop. So we have over here. He holds it's mutter. So we want to suggest that is the machlokes. We also have a machlokes if you're allowed to use if you need it to be written l'shma. If it has to be written for her special, then something that was written for one lady cannot be used for another lady. But if it doesn't have to be written for her, then you could use one that was written for another lady, and huadin, you'll be able to use that as a Sefer Torah. Because when people write a Sefer Torah, they're not writing the Sefer Torah special for a Soita. They're writing Sefer to use. So it wasn't written for her. So that same Shaila would be this Shaila over here as well. Does it have to be written Lishma for this specific lady or not? If it does, then you can't use a Megillah that was written for another woman, and you can't use a Sefer Torah either. So Gemara, no, lav davka that this is the same machlokes, because a Sefer Torah might be different than a parsha Soita that was written for a different woman. Omer Baba Dilma Lohi, Atkan Lohi Komer Tanakama Hosam. Why did our Tanakama say over here that Ein Megillas Kshera Lahashkus Ba Soita Acheres? Why did the Tanakama say that over there? Is because Alakiban the Intik L'Shum Rachel. Here you have a parsha of Soita that was written specifically for Rachel. Sulei Hadru Mintaka L'Shem Leah, not L'Shum Leah. You can't make this for Leah if it was originally written for Rachel. Avagabe Torah, this Stama Michtava, the Sefer Torah is a blank check. It wasn't written when whoever wrote the Sefer Torah didn't write it with the intent of any specific Soita. He wrote it for a general intent, which means it can also be used for Soita. Maybe Hachanami the Machinon, maybe you would be able to use the Sefer Torah. Omar Ibn Nachman Yitzchak, another reason to suggest that these machlokes are not totally zebazeh. That you could use it from one woman to another woman. There it was a parsha of Soita that was written specifically for this process. When you write a Sefer Torah, you never really have in mind that you're going to use it for a Soita. You write it because you're going to use it. So therefore, it wasn't written at all Hashem, even the parsha of Soita. Therefore, Hakanami Deloy Machkin. So let's stop here for a second, because we know that the person who writes the parsha of Soita has to be a kohen. It has to be a kohen. And therefore, all this shaila about using a Sefer Torah is only if the kohen, if the cipher of this particular Sefer Torah happened to have been a kohen. Because if the person who wrote the Sefer Torah wasn't a kohen, you would not be able to use it anyway. So then there's a shaila, maybe only if a kohen writes a Sefer Torah, you cannot use kankan time because you won't be able to use it for Soita. But maybe if a Yisrael write the Sefer Torah, where anyway it will never be able to be used for a Soita because it wasn't written by a kohen, maybe then you would be able to use kankan time. That is a shaila. Halacha l'maisa we passed when you could use kankan time in the Sefer Torah. Anyway, so Rabbi Achi Yosy said that if the parsha of Soita was written for Rachel and then Rachel was moida, so now you have an extra parsha of Soita, we're allowed to use this for another woman. In fact, the more of a Leslie, Rabbi Achi Yosy, a hot and tanan, does Rabbi Achi Yosy not hold to the Indian of Lishma? Because of get lagar says history, Eruvin wrote a get for his wife Leah, and then V'nimlach, and then Leah won the 649. So V'nimlach, he changed his mind, and he thought maybe I shouldn't divorce her. And I don't think I'm pointing to the right place. V'nimlach, and his wife won the 649 after he wrote his get, and he decided maybe I really love her after all. Umatzai ben Irai, And he says, listen, I spent $500 to have the cipher right up the skit to shoot it that you go into the garbage. So he found a friend, Eruvin. He says, Eruvin, you don't like your wife, do you? Ah, I hate her. He says, you know what? I have a get for you. I can give it to you cheap because I have it extra. The Amr, he said, Shimcha Kashmi, you have the same name as me. And your wife has the same name as me. We're both in the same city. So let's use it. So what is the Brisa say? It's a Brisa that we're quoting. 1 second. Let me just. It's a Brisa. It's not right. So the Brisa says the halacha is pasul lagarish boy. You're not allowed to use this for a get because it wasn't written lishma. It has to be written l'shem this woman. So oibazoi here too by soita it also says va'asala. By the get Rashi says alma v'chosav law. You see that a get has to be written l'shem this specific woman, otherwise it's not a good get. Alma v'chosav law mashma l'shma. The v'chosav law tells you that it has to be written l'shma. Well, by soita hachanami ksiva asala. In the parsha of soita it says va'asala. So why wouldn't you learn that it means l'shma? So why would Yosy allow a parsha of soita to be used for another woman? So there's a very big difference. Hachiyashta hasam by get the chosav loksiv. It has to be written l'shma. Be'inan ksiva l'shma. Hacha it doesn't say you have to write it. It's va'asala loksiv. You have to make it. Be'inan asiyah l'shma. Asiyah dida mechikehi. Who said it's the writing of the parsha of soita that has to be l'shma? It's when you erase it, it has to be l'shma. So surely you can apply this Megillah of soita that was written for one woman to another woman, as long when you pour the water on it to wipe it out, that pouring, that wiping out was done l'shem, the specific woman that we're talking about. Amar Bacha Bachanina. Goli v'yaduya l'fnei misha amar v'aya olam. The Rebbeinu Shalom knows clear. She'ein b'dayresh Rab Meir kamoisa. There was nobody in Rab Meir's generation who was as a Talmud Chacham as him. There was no such person. So if that's the case, why weren't they always koivei the halacha like him? You see, Rabbi Akiva rejected something that he did. The reason is he was such an unbelievable lamdan. People couldn't understand him. They couldn't figure out when he said things that were correct, and when he was not right. And the reason why they couldn't figure it out is he had such a persuasive mind. He was able to make such good arguments that he could convince you that day is night and night is day. So we never knew when he was always so persuasive, we couldn't distinguish when he was really right and when he was really wrong. So therefore, we couldn't paskin like him. He could take something that we know halacha l'mais is tamei, and he would be able to persuade us that it was Torah. Umar leiponim al Torah, and he would be able to show us umar leiponim kama, and he would be able to convince us that he's right, that this thing that we know is tamei, that it's Torah. Or on the flip side, al Torah tamei. If we knew something that for sure was Torah, he would be able to make an argument that it's tamei. Umar leiponim, and again he could prove it. He was an excellent debater. He was excellent at bringing out svaras. So because of that, no matter how good a svara was, we knew that he would be able to persuade us about something that's not kalacha, so therefore we weren't able to follow. Tana, Rab Meir Shemai. He really was, his name wasn't really Rab Meir. It was a nickname given to him. Rab Nahairai Shemai. His name was Rabbi Nahairai. Alama Shenikra Shemai Rab Meir. Why was it called a Meir? Shahu Meir Ene Chachamim Ba'alacha. Because he would light up the eyes of the Chachamim in halacha. So this is a little bit contradictory, because a second ago we said that he confused us and we couldn't follow his halacha. And now it's saying that he would light up our eyes with halacha. So the Mashah says that in order to paskin, you have to be able to so clearly understand both sides of the shaila, and only then can you paskin. So Reb Meir was able to paskin. We weren't able to accept from him, but Reb Meir was really the person who was able to paskin because he was the one who was able to really understand both sides of the Shiloh. It's interesting to note that in middle of Vayikra, there's a pasuk that says Kol Hoylech Al Gochain when it's talking about the Tumah of Shrotzim. And there's a little note in Al Chamoshim that says this word is exactly half of the Torah in letters. If you count all the letters in the Torah, this word Gochain is the halfway mark. And the Mefarshim say that it's referring to this Gemara because they're talking about Tumah Shrotzim, and we're going to soon see that there's a discussion of Tumah Shrotzim, and it's 50-50. It's exactly half to indicate that Rav Meir was able to make an argument to either side of the shaila of if a sheretz is tummy or not, which is what we're going to be discussing very shortly.
Isn't there a Gemara someplace that says that to be a Tana, you have to be somebody who would be able to be mitayr to Meim and to Mitamatayrim?
Well, Rav Meir is certainly qualified. But
is there such a Gemara?
I'm not able to answer that. That's a good question for Rabbi Avram. I know to use a camera. Rabbi Avram knows Shas. Okay. So
which Rabbi Avram is this?
Rabbi Avram Weisbrod.
Oh wow.
Okay, please let us know. You know, Reb Meir's name wasn't really Nahiroi either. Reb Nechemia Shemai. V'amri la Reb Elazar ben Arach Shemai. V'lo menikra Shemai Nahiroi. Why was it called Nahiroi? Shemanir Einei Chacham Balacha. He opens up our eyes. This Gemara here is the Makar for our minute against Klal Yisrael. Whenever
I'll
you
watch it on
something,
YouTube afterwards.
put money into the pushka and you say Elaka de Meir Aneinu, and we daven, and we say we the lashon of the tefillah is when we lose things. The lashon is, let me see if I have the exact lashon. We say the yazerli she'emtza mashavadati. That's a nusach that people say when they lose things and they put money to Meir Balanes. And everyone knows you lose something, you put money to Meir Balanes pushka, and you say Lakad Meir Aneinu. Where does it come from? It's this Gemara. This Gemara is the Makar for Lakad Meir Aneinu, because it says Nahiroi Shemanir Einei Chacham Balacha. Meir opens up our eyes when we can't see something and we can't find something. Meir opens up our eyes. This is the Makar of Lakad Meir Aneinu. Amar Rebbe. Hi, the mechadadna mechavroi. This that I'm sharper than all my friends. It's because the chazise le'Reb Meir me'achorei. I didn't have a good seat. I sat behind the goalpost. Kishalumadati lefonov yishavti b'shur shalachrov. I sat behind him. Wasn't such a good seat. So I only, but at least I saw the back, and that alone was enough to make me so great. Bilu chazisi mikamei. If I would have been zoicha to see his face, if I got a seat in front, I would be even more sharp. Your eyes must see your Rebbe. And the Lakuti Rashi brings down that Aaron HaKohen used to go sit and look at Moshe's face as Moshe taught him the Torah. Now it's interesting to note, what exactly is this? What exactly is this that you see when you why is it that you're more mechudod when you see the face? So the Pashup Pshat is, the Marsha says, is because when you just hear someone's voice, yeah, you hear what he's saying. But when you look at his face, you see his facial expressions. And often facial expressions add to the understanding of something. And if I'm not mistaken, they say over from Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, I believe my Rosh Yeshiva Rebellia said it over, that Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, when he prepared shir, he actually prepared shir in the mirror. And he actually rehearsed not only the words that he was going to say in shir, but he rehearsed his facial expressions for each part of the shir, because in his mind that was just as important in giving over the information as the actual words selected. So that's what how the Mashal learns why if you see your Rebbe's face, you're more mechuded. But there's other pshatim that they say that a tzaddik's face radiates kedusha, and by seeing the tzaddik's face, it would radiate kedusha, and that's what would make him would have made him more mechudad. And there's even a shayla la'alocha. When you see a tzaddik, a talmid chochem agad lador, you make a bracha asher cholak michachmosai lireyav. So the Chashuchi Chemed, who is Reb Chaim Kanievsky's brother-in-law, Reb Zilberstein, he paskins that if you see a gadol from the back, you cannot make the bracha asher cholak michachmosai lireyav, because his face is what radiates the kedusha, and that's what you're making the bracha on, and therefore you cannot make the bracha unless you see his face. They say b'derech melitza, I only saw Meir Me'achoyov, meaning I only saw him running away from Averis, but I never saw him in front. I never was able to see his running towards mitzvahs, and I would have been much better if I would have been able to learn from his enthusiasm to do mitzvahs. Omar Abavo Omar Yochanan, Talmud Hoyeloi Reb Meir. Reb Meir had a Talmud, and his name was V'Sumcha Shemoi. Shal Yomer Al Kol Davar V'Davar Shal Tuma. Anything that was Tamei, Arboim Ushmoina Taimei Tuma. He gave 48 explanations for why it's Tamei. Al Kol Davar V'Davar Shal Tahira, Arboim Ushmoina Taimei Tahira. Now, often Rav David Zolti always suggests that when we're talking about these big numbers, it's B'derech Guzma. Over here, the Mefarshim speak out that it wasn't a Guzma. It says by Moshe Rabbeinu, "Vatechasreyu mat melekim," and the Mefarshim say that Moshe Rabbeinu was zoichet to the 49th level of Chachma, not the 50th, but the Chasreyu mat melekim. He was one level below the highest level. So the significance of 48 is not above 48. The significance of this 48 is that he was one madrega below Moshe Rabbeinu in his clarity and his understanding of the Torah. So Sumchis was just one notch below Moshe Rabbeinu. Tana we learned, Talmud Vosek Hayu Yavna. There was a dear Talmud in Yavna. Showing Matar es Hasheretz b'meya v'chamishim time. He would find 150 reasons to be Matar Hasheretz. So Tosfos jumps all over this. How could you? Why is it so great that he had a reason to be Matar Hasheretz that the Torah says is Tomei? So Tosfos speaks about, maybe it's not speaking about the Sheretz being Tomei, it's talking about Tumas Masa. And he's just trying to say that it's not Tamei B'Masa, and Tosfos goes through a whole shaila, the long Tosfos know it all, of whether or not Shiratzim are Tamei B'Masa or not. Omar Avina, Ani Adain, I'll make a Kal V'Chomer V'Tarenu, and I'll be able to show you that a Sheretz is going to be tar. And again, Tosfos says from Tumas Masa, you can't say a Sheretz is tar. The Torah says a Sheretz is Tamei if you touch it. Uma Nachash Shemenis, a Nachash will bite someone, kill that person, and make a mace. Umar b'tumah. So a nachash is the catalyst for a lot of tumah, serious tumah, tumah's mace. Nevertheless, tar, if the nachash itself dies, it's tahar, it's not one of the shratzim. So sheretz, a sheretz she'ein memis, umar b'tumah, it doesn't have the ability to kill and therefore cause more tumahs, not animals, not humans. Like kol she'ein, surely it itself should not be tumah. But Velohi, that's not really a Kal V'Chomer. All the snake is doing, he's not really causing tumah. He's just the syringe with which the venom enters the body to kill the animal, to kill the person. So that's not a real Kal V'Chomer. Omar Baba Amar Shmuel. Sholosh Shonim Nechlichu Beishamei Beisol. 3 years, the series of disputes that we know and we learn all over Shas between Beishamei and Beisil, all of those disputes occurred within a span of 3 years. Of course, Beishamai says Allah lakas. And what happened? Yotza Baskel v'Amra. Baskel came out and said, "Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim he, but v'alach Beisil." In fact, the more v'chemei achar she'elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim b'pnei ma zochu Beisil l'kfoy Allah k'moison. So the more b'shenoichin, they're calm, v'aluvin, and they're humble. Hayu, they were v'shoinin divreim v'divrei Beishamai. Not only did they review their perspective, but they would hard it to understand Beishamai's perspective. Not only that, they actually first investigated Beishamai's perspective, and they presented his perspective first, and only then, because of their anova, did they offer their perspective. Now, the problem here is the reason why we pass like Basil has nothing to do with the Baskel. We pass like Basil because they're roiv, and we know Achay Rab Lahatos, and that's why we pass like that.
Lo b'shamayim.
That's right, Achay Rab Lahatos. So why do you need exactly? We learned that we actually had there's a Toshos a couple of blot ago when we were talking about Tosh Lo b'shamayim. Toshos asks over there. I don't understand. We go Basil passing like the roiv. The reason why we had the reason why we have the Baskel is because Beis Shammai was known to be sharper and smarter. So because of that, you might think that you would follow them, even though the Rav is like Basil. The Baskel came out and say, no, I don't care how smart they are and how sharp they are. Torah Lo b'shamayim, he follow the normal rules of Psak. So where do you see that Beis Hillel actually presented Beis Shammai's svara first? They put Beis Shammai first. It's like the Mishnah in Sukkah. It says as follows: Misha Yeroishev Verubai Besukkah, V'Shulchani B'Seicha Bayis. He was in a very small sukkah that his body fit into it, but his table was inside the house. Beis Shammai Poisel, Beis Shammai held its puzzle. Beis Hillel Machshirin, Beis Hillel holds it's a kosher sukkah. Amu Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. So Beis Hillel told Beis Shammai, Loi kach hoya ma'isa. Isn't this a true story? Shehalchu zikne Beis Shammai v'zikne Beis Hillel lavaker es Rabbi Yochanan ben Achironis. But look how they said the story. The zikne Beis Shammai and the zikne Beis Hillel. They didn't say the zikne Beis Hillel and then afterward the zikne Beis Shammai. They put Beis Shammai first. So this is the anova that we're trying to
It's more than that.
exhibit.
Yosy Zalman, it's more than that. He didn't just put Beis Shammai first. Beis Shammai, the Ziknei Beis Shammai actually went first. That's how they're recording.
They let them go first. They let them go first.
And so
Okay,
they're
very
recording it that way.
Very good, very good, very good. So let me see. I know Rashi says over here, the Kamilu Maisa Shahochu Zikne Beshamai Bahad Zikne Besil. Right, it's not how they recorded it. They actually let them go first. Very good. Very good. Okay, Shkoyach. So what happened over here? Now, so what happened was, so that's the example where they did first. So they went to Levakar Shabirchim Echaros, so Matsu Yoshev, Roishev Ruba Besukha, V'Shulchani B'Seicha Bayis, Ambala by Shammai. So they were trying to indicate that, you see, he did it, so it must be good. And Beis Shammai responded, Mishom Raya, Afhein Amruloi, actually the Zikne Beis Shammai told him, if that's how you feared zich in your sukkah, L'kiyamta mitzvah sukkah miyamecha. So let's stop here for a second, because this shows where they put Beis Shammai's words first. But where does it say Vishonin Devreim? They review their own words and Divrei Beis Shammai. So Rashi gives us a very good example. We learned in Brachas a machloikis between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and Beis Shammai says, but Krishma ba'erev, you have to say lying down. Yatav yikra. Uvaboiker Krishma shel shachris yamo, you should stand. Shenemar b'shach b'cha uvikomecha. Sometimes you say Krishma lying down, that's at night. Sometimes you say Krishma standing up, which is during the day. And here where you see how Beis Hillel delves into Beis Shammai, because the Gemara asks, Beis Hillel says, you Beis Shammai learn it out of b'shach b'mecha, so we're going to address your shita. We learn a different pshat in b'shach b'mecha. We learn b'shah shederech b'nei adam sheichvin or b'shah shederech b'nei adam aimdim. B'shach b'mecha is merely teaching us the timing of when you say Krishma. So you don't see that Beis Shammai was concerned about how to emperor the Melech over derech of Beis Hillel, but you see Beis Hillel was very concerned about making sure that they have an answer to Beis Shammai's shita, that b'shach b'mecha tells you the position that you need to be in. You say Krishma. So you see, they took their opponents' svaris very, very seriously, and that's why they were zoicha that halacha is like them. So Zok Gemara, a beautiful, beautiful limud that we learn from here. L'lamdecha, to teach you. If you make yourself small, Hakadosh Baruch Hu magbioi. Hashem makes you big; He raises you up. But if you try to make yourself big, Hakadosh Baruch Hu mashpiloi. Hakadosh Baruch Hu will make you small. If someone is trying too hard to be a gadol, to be someone choshev, he wants to build himself up. Gedoyle barachas mimenu. Gedula barachas mimenu. It's going to run away from him. V'chol ha'bereich min ha'gedula, gedula machzeres acharav. So the Chofetz Chaim asks, so whichever way you go, you're still not going to have gedula. If you try to get gedula, you're not going to achieve it. And if you run away from gedula, it's going to run after you, but you're still running away. So at the end of the day, you're still left with nothing. So you're no further ahead one way than the other way. So on that, the Chofetz Chaim said that what it means is it means after he dies, he's going to end up being known as a great tzaddik. But someone who did everything just for publicity and to build himself up, that's a person after he dies, he's not going to be remembered for his good deeds.
There's another thing also that nothing tight is makudish. Yeah.
If someone pushes the envelope, Rashi says, he's working too hard to become wealthy. And he sees it just not going, but he keeps on pushing at it. He takes great lengths. He just wants his goal. So what happens to such a person? But if someone who just does his job and hopes for the best, then his opportunity will come and they'll make it big. They'll be successful. So Rashi says this is referring to Hashir, it's referring to Parnasa, Uliskadal and greatness. So it just means even though we have to work hard and we have to make a shtadlis, we can't freak out if we don't succeed. We do have to keep on trying. And at the right time, Hashem will grant us the hatzlacha that we're so desperately seeking. Zog to Gemara weiter. Tanu Rabban, shtei shanu mechza, for 2.5 years, nechlu b'shamai, about this particular issue. Because we just learned a minute earlier that they're arguing for 3 years, but for 2.5 years they were discussing this specific issue. Halalu Aimim, one group said, it would have been better if a person was never created. It's better off that he was created. Of all the mitzvahs we could do. They had a vote and they decided that it would have been better if he wasn't created. But now that we're here, Rashi said that means examine your deeds that you've already done. And find out all your affairs and do tshuva, and then it will be good that you were born. And there are those who say it's yamash meish b'maisav, and Rashi says that means if you have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, think of what you're going to lose by not doing the mitzvah versus benefiting it if you do the mitzvah. You should never abandon a mitzvah because it might cost you money, because of the losses that you feel you're going to incur by doing the mitzvah. Eventually, you're going to get schar for this mitzvah that will far outweigh any expense or loss you had in the doing the mitzvah. If you want to do an avera because you think you're going to benefit from something, think about that it's not really going to get you further ahead. You'll just be running on a treadmill. The Mesilas Yesharim
This is for Shalom.
Oh, it's a very good message. That's right. He says Yimashmish b'maisav. The Mesilas Yesharim Yimashmish b'maisav is not only do you have to do tshuva for your affairs, you have to look at the mitzvahs that you do, and you have to examine them. Are they really done with the right kavanah? Are they really done properly, 100%? So even your good deeds, you have to work on refining to make sure that they're perfect. Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. Look the Heilige Mishnah. Hakarish Omer. We talked about this beam that goes across the top of the opening of the mavi. So it has to be rachva lakabel ariach. It has to be wide enough, thick enough that you could put a row of bricks. The ariach. What is an ariach? It's chatzel levenish shloshet tvachim. It's a half a brick of 3 tvachim. So in simple terms, it's a brick is a tefach and a half, and the beam has to be able to hold a brick that's a tefach and a half. So at first glance, you would say, okay, if it has to hold a brick that's a tefach and a half, it needs to be a tefach and a half, right? You put a tefach and a half brick on a on a tefach and a half beam. But Zok the Mishnah, Dai L'Kaira, should they rachva tefach. It only has to be a tefach, meaning the brick can overhang a quarter of a tefach on either side. Kedei L'Kabel Ariach, L'Rachvai, so that it could hold a brick on its width. So, to make it very simple, if this is my beam, so the brick would go this way. So let's see if I can get something that will be in place of a brick. Let's say this is my brick. So the brick would go on it this way. It hangs over a little bit over here, hangs over a little bit over here. From here to here is a tefach and a half, but from here to here is only a tefach. So that's what the Gemara means to say. That's what the Mishnah means to say. Zok the Gemara, Uvriya, it has to be sturdy enough. It has to be strong enough to support the brick. Vidaimer Rachva, it only has to be wide enough. Even though it's not thick enough, not strong enough, as long as it's wide enough. In other words, if it's made out of straw or reeds, which surely cannot support the weight of a brick, you look at it as if it's metal, and as long as it's a tefach wide, it's adequate for the kaira. Akuma, what if it was on a slant? So if you put a brick on it, it would slide off. We look at it as if it was flat. Agula, now we're going to learn some mathematics. If it's round, we look at it as if you shaved it and made it into a flat surface. And how do you know if it's going to be big enough to be a tefach? Zok the Mishnah, if you take a string and put it around it, and you got a circumference of 3 tvachim, yesh be'roich tefach, then you know its diameter is a tefach, because that's the law of pi. 2 pi r is the formula. 2 times pi times the radius. Pi is 3.1413, so it's approximately a 1-to-3 ratio between the diameter and the circumference. And I guess we could stop here.
Thank you.
Shabbat Tov.
So
What time tomorrow morning?
Tomorrow we're going to learn at 6:30, and then we're going to learn again at 9. Oh, was it 6:30 or 6:45? I think it's 6:45.
It's not negay on me.
So we're learning at 9. People who want to learn earlier, do we want to learn at 6:30 or at 6:45?
Usually we do 6:45, no?
Oh yeah, I think okay. So tomorrow morning at 6:45.
Gewaldig.
Okay, see you guys tomorrow. Have a wonderful evening. Rab David, how was Shabbos Sheva Brachas?
Excellent.
Beautiful. Should have
Very tiring.
and simcha.
Thank God today's shir was not so complicated like the last few days.
That's right.
First,
I'm exhausted.
So someone told over a very good story today.